takes place over days, months, and years. The paintings in this gallery now are all done since 2015. But some of the layers might be from 2015. I do them different times of the day, different times of the year. They're a lot about memory, and I think probably the main subject is probably loss. I have a saying I use for them that when I'm painting, I call it nostalgia for the present. That even while I'm painting things, I'm sort of mourning, the fact that they'll be gone. The famous line from Goethe, how does it go? Stay a moment, you are so beautiful.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
That, this moment, stay. This moment is so beautiful, please stay. And that in some way, it's a memorial. They're memorials of moments. And the layering comes a lot, I think, from my study of physics, not real physics, but just the fact that physics seems to indicate that time as we know it doesn't exist as we know it. And so I was an abstract painter for that very reason. The feeling that this is all an illusion, so I paint it. But I was continually drawn to the act of depicting the excitement of the sky is changing, the water's changing, everything's changing, and trying to capture that. So I always, I was doing big abstract paintings, and I was always doing little watercolors when I traveled, sort of saying to myself, well, they're just like snapshots. I'm not really lying to anybody about what time is and what reality is. And then it just, the abstract paintings just started getting images in them. I started wanting to paint. I always thought in layers and I always painted in layers, even the abstract paintings. But I wanted to be able to change a layer, revisit a layer, and it just felt to me like a better way to depict reality was in layers that were distinct and separate. And gradually it came to this. Originally they were painted on two sides of one piece of plexiglass, and then I'd have 2, 3, 4. They get up to like 6 really heavy, larger paintings. Then they were all just layered like this. But one time I was traveling and I just put one sheet of Plex on the edge of my paint box and the other sheet like this. And the distance between the sheets just, I don't know.
Just, I think, in my opinion, it's like to have another point of view. It's like to have the distance to see something else, if you're not from the place. This is what I think. And the second is that Martin afterwards reminded me the dialogue that you can read in the Calvino book, The Invisible Cities, in which there is the dialogue. I have the dialogue in Italian, of course, but I try to translate it in English. In this dialogue, there is Marco Polo with Genghis Khan, the Emperor of China, and Marco Polo say, "Sire, now I have to tell you about all the city I know," and the Khan. "There is still one of which you never speak." And Marco Polo bowed his head. "Venice," the Khan said. Marco Polo smiled. What else do you believe I have been talking to you about? The emperor did not turn a hair and says, and yet I have never heard you mention that name. And Marco Polo said, every time I describe a city, I am saying something about Venice. And every time that Martin also is painting, is saying something about Venice, and immediately this something can be lost. And the Kant says, when I ask you about other cities, I want to hear about them. And about Venice, when I ask you about Venice. Paul, to distinguish the other city qualities, I must speak of a first city that remains implicit. For me, it's Venice. Memories, images, once they are fixed in walls, are erased, Paul will say. Perhaps I am afraid of losing Venice all at once if I speak of it. Or perhaps, speaking of other cities, I have already lost it little by little. So I think that the Martin discourse about the time, about the space, through the view of the city, absolutely reminds me the way in which Calvino is speaking and through Marco Polo about the city of Venice in the Italian literature. So I found this very, very interesting. And also there is a very interesting interview by Calvino about the city of Utopia. And about Utopia, so it's a city, the place that does not exist. The joke that I love to do is the homophonia between the English and the Italian word of Utopia. Because if you say Utopia in Italian is the alpha privativa in ancient Greek is without place, because it's you, and this topos in Greece is place. But if you say if you can hear the sound in English is Utopia, and you can understand EU, and EU in ancient Greek is good. So the interesting paradox situation for me is that you can speak about Utopia, and also we can speak about Utopia as a place that doesn't exist, but in the meantime is the best place you can find. So this is my free association about Martin works. Now I want to give you place because I know, of course, in Italian I will be very, very, very comfortable for me to speak about everything, of course. But you know, in English I have to take my time, I have to translate in my mind. So I also have this kind of joke with words that I love to do. I give you room, and please feel free to say what you have in your mind, like a free association.
I can say that what touches me especially about Martin's work is, like you said, is from overseas, but I think he captured the essence of Venice very well, because I'm in love with this city since a very long time, and one thing that scares me is to hear people all the time saying how impermanent Venice can be. You hear all the time, read articles, Venice can disappear. Every time I hear that, it's like something difficult for me to hear. But at the same time, I was not thinking about your work, but I came with the evaporator from Giudecca, and the weather was very much changing. I saw some tourists, they were trying to capture some photos, and it's beautiful for 1 second, and then suddenly the ferry passes by and you don't have your picture, and then suddenly the sunlight doesn't hit the water and you still can't capture it. There's something of Venice that is like that. It's constantly, like the beauty of Venice is flittering. It's like something, it's there for 1 second and then it's not there. And I think this is something that you captured very, very well. And in a way, there's something reassuring about this idea of not linear time where there will be a bad ending, the city disappears. I think your work conveys this idea that it's not there, but it's there, and it will come back. It's more, for me, it represents more a cyclical time than a linear time. So I really think you really captured the real essence of this city.
Thank you.
As I said, but the remarkable thing about Venice is it's the only city in the world that is self-cleansing. The sewage system here is brilliant because it uses the tide, it uses tunnels and the sea to clear it out. And the thing is that it picks up its own shit. Now, if we as human beings could pick up our own shit, we wouldn't be in the place that we are.
Well, I think, that's what these are about too. I mean, is this shifting. I mean, inevitably what you're talking about is the shit being washed away.
Yeah.
And yeah, people always think of Venice, or used to more, as a dirty place, but I always think of it as a wonderful, clean place. I have to say, I was being a little, this is a psychoanalytic forum, and as Luca said, it's not being quite as intense as normally because it is being recorded. But that the city is not only bound up for me, how beautiful it is and how long, but with, I came here with my mother. I've been here with friends who are since dead. I've been here, over the years a lot. Since I was 8, I think. The first drawing I had of Venice is when I was 8 years old. So the city it isn't just that it's beautiful, it's also that it's a very emotional place for me.
There is this slippage of time in the images as you make these layers and refer to different aspects of the city. But you were talking initially about, nostalgia and things, if things could stay the same or as things disappear or change. The thing about it is that these paintings, I mean, Venice, if the city could be immortal, that's what Venice is to me. I mean, the same issues that are presented now that it's going to disappear, they've been fighting forever here. And there's always there's this essence in these paintings that keeps raising to the surface through the border. And even though the buildings, in one painting, the buildings were shift and show a reference from an earlier time, it all is so interwoven and just keeps expanding. That's what I love about these little paintings. How expansive they are in a world as I move through them, and they keep changing from different angles, and they're quite complex and beautiful. I mean, that's I think we forget about beauty sometimes. I'm a big fan of it too, as you apparently are.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the things that I know about Martin's paintings is the way he begins. That the first layer is a layer of darkness. And Martin's brilliance is in the way that he is able to depict light. And so I think it's a kind of wonderful comparison or metaphor for this place, because all of this light and beauty, there are origins of darkness. There have to be. The city has darkness. And I love the fact that he creates these paintings, these objects that obscure the darkness, and he brings this brilliance to the surface. But there's this knowledge that those of us who know where these paintings are coming from, where their origins are, I think that's just kind of a wonderful understanding of the work. That as is the place, there's darkness underneath to produce this light and brilliance. And I think that that's really an important thing to know about his work. And that's one of the things that, as I'm looking at them, I know underneath there's this dark place.
I was thinking about that today too, because I'm currently reading a book that I highly recommend for people who love Venice, from Marco Pogaznik. is somebody who studied geometry, you know, the ley lines, the energy lines, the telluric lines, you know, under the earth. And he's saying that Venice has been deliberately, you know, built according to these lines. So I think, you know, what you're saying is absolutely true, that there's something about Venice that is born from under, from the darkness, from the soul, from the, it's raised from that.
I don't really know Martin, so I didn't know about the darkness sort of starting that, in that place for the painting. But in a way, another way for me, it's about the magic. That magic can come out of darkness, which really fits in with the Biennale this year, because there's so much magic realism and surrealism. Yeah.
Trying to digest all of that. You know, I guess I have an argument with the idea that, you know, Venice has survived and will survive because, of course, nothing ultimately will survive any more than we will. And that's what makes the things we love so precious, including each other, is that they won't survive. So, you know, I mean, Venice is going to last longer than we will. but ultimately, yeah. The whole planet is doomed. The whole universe.
No, it's still alive. It's very still alive. And playing, so we are happy for that. And we are living the abyss. What the abyss is a darkness inside without the end. The abyss is full of power. You know, I wrote a paper about that. So, yeah, yeah. And try to connect with your sentences. And we think about an interview, a very interesting interview that Calvino did when he was in Paris, and he was asked to speak about Venice. And I can read it, it's easier for me, but what I mean is the power of the water. And for example, the real door in a house in Venice is not, Calvino says, the door that is on the campo or on the streets on the calle, but the real door is the door of the water. And also he says that we have in Venice many different names to call calle, Salizzada, Fondamenta, and the streets, many names, Portico and so on. But we have very few names to call the river, the water, like canal. No, very few names, and he was asking himself, but why is this differences between so many names for that and so few names for the water? And so, probably is because the water doesn't need to have so many names, because the water is like the water all over the world. So it's like to have a place in the water, and the water could be seen like an environment of the world. So it doesn't need to have so many different names. And if you want, I can read something about this interview. It's interesting because he was speaking also in a way in which Venice from a person, an artist, of course, not from Venice as well, but in love with the place. For example, he says, nothing gives the idea of an extra dimension like the houses I told you before of Venice. Doors open onto the water. It's always a challenge for the mental laziness of the man from the mainland to get used to the idea that is the real door, while the other one, which opens onto the campo or calle, is only a secondary door. But you only need to reflect for a moment to understand that the door onto the canal connects not to one particular waterway, but to all waterways. That is the liquid expanse that envelops the entire planet. This is what you feel in the houses of Venice, that the left door gives access to a limited portion of the world to an eyes, while the door onto the water leads directly to a boundless dimension. Venice actually provokes in man a particular mental climate, a special geometry, precisely not euclidea. Una geometria non euclidea abbiamo qua a Venezia. In Venice, the shortest line between 2 points is never the straight one. It is this, says Calvino, that unleashes our imagination onto unusual pathways, whilst there is nothing unbounded in the level of respective sensations, space opens and closes before us in constantly changed configurations. The extraordinary accomplishment of Venice is precisely its extreme diversification, not uniformity in an homogeneous experience. It is no mere chance that the street technology here is of an unparalleled richness, Calli Campi, what I told you before. But I realize that I am unable to remember as many words for the waterways, canal and that. If there is a question of, for the poor retention of my memory, or our nomenclature of waterways is poor, and the variety of forms the lagoon labyrinth introduced us to. I think also we can, when Calvino uses the word labyrinth, is introducing us something that is very powerful, not only in our mythological point of view, because the labyrinth is a place in which you can get lost, but you can only in the labyrinth you can find yourself after meeting the Minotaur. But what is the Minotaur? The Minotaur is a Greek, ancient Greek figure, but the Minotaur is also the other part of yourself. So this is why probably also when I was a child, I was not from many, but I was here when I was almost 8, 10, and one of my best job was to get lost in the city. Because to get lost in the city was like the way to give me the power to understand that my ego-centered power is different. There is a corner of without. There is a corner where something could be creative, could be start. And in either case, there could be a single explanation. Speaking about water, water is an undefined element. Its differentiation is given by the emergence places. The lagoon is a single level, while quays and bridges with their constant ascent and descent of steps introduce the element of discontinuity that is characteristic of the language. Calvino is almost upset by that extra dimension of the water. Living in Venice, he says, and living aside the water doesn't mean finding yourself in the same condition as the inhabitants of the other cities. You live in a city in a negative. The imagination refuses to picture a dry Venice. If you try to imagine the canals dried up, you see abysses open up between the banks, a nightmare city crossed by bottomless canyons. Or, in another sequence of the nightmare, the canals close up, heal, bringing the walls of the houses close together in a narrow alleys. What do you think? Is it possible the future reality of Venice? You were asking something like that about the future. I think that now we cannot think about our body, we cannot think about our earth in this world without thinking about the environment. We cannot think also our body like an environment as well. So when the journalist asked to Calvino about the future of Venice, Calvino says, you more and more often see the Venetian model appear in plans of the cities of the future, such as in the town planners' proposals to solve the traffic problem in London, roads for vehicles that pass down below while the pedestrians circulate on elevated roads and bridges. Water will always have a greater place in city life. In the period of transition we are about to go through, in which many cities will have to be abandoned or rebuilt from top to bottom, Venice, which did not go through the brief phase of human history in which it was thought that the future was of the motor car, will be the city most able to overcome the crisis and indicate new developments from its experience. So the journalist says, so Venice is the city of the future, not only the city of the past. And Calvino says, yes, it is. And Venice will lose one thing, the fact of being one of a kind. The world will fill up with Venices, or rather super Venices, in which multiple grids at different heights will overlap and drink up. Navigable channels, roads and canals for overcraft, underground, underwater or elevated railways. It is in this frame that the future of Venice must be seen, considering it in its historic artistic fascination is to grasp only one aspect, illustrious but restricted, the strength type that looks onto utopia. So the great, I think that Calvino is thinking that we will lose Venice probably because we will see the model of Venice also in the future in other cities. Just not to have the copy of the place, but to have the way of thinking a place in which we can live in. So I think I think this is important because it's very close with when Marco Polo says that probably I will lose Venice anytime we are speaking about Venice. It's not about the memory. And so it's interesting the relations between the memory and the future. And there is also a very interesting book by a British psychoanalyst that I love, Wilfred Bion, and when he wrote the 3 books, and the title of the book is The Memory of the Future. It's a paradoxical title speaking about the way in which the memory could be something that you can have in the future. And I think that also in the artwork, marching, and in art in general, we have this kind of possibility, this kind of feeling to think about the future without knowing. And in particular, in a way, and in the time in which we are living with now, it's very important to have this kind of feeling with artists. It's not to prevedere, to see in the future. It's like to have the feeling of something that is changing for the future. I give you room.
See, Venice, I've been here twice, my second trip, and I realized what a complicated city it is. And when I walk it, and I look at Martin's paintings, and I think, he was able to bring calm to that complexity for a few moments. You look at his work, and you don't see what it feels like to walk through these alleys between the buildings, and there is no straight line there. Everything is hard to imagine that it was planned. It was just sort of like, what's that? You know, and you think about like what are the internal workings of the politics of governing an island that is constantly shifting a little bit here and there, and they have to keep it stable. And then you look at the paintings in here, and you realize that if you move from one side of the room to the other and look at Martin's paintings, they're doing just that. You know, they are shifting, and you get closer to them, and they become another thing. But I think he's really nailed it. I think he really has.
But you also have to think about the origins of this city being a place of refuge and retreat.
Yeah.
And that same kind of delusional impression of this place as a place of retreat
knowing that there is all this shifting under your feet constantly, not only just figuratively but literally. The thing is shifting under your feet. So to me, Martin's paintings as layers is another material, tactile way, tangible way of realizing that reality. Because once you think about them as objects and you know that Martin has been shifting and moving over time, you know, I think that that's probably one of the things that's so mysterious and so important for anyone who is engaging this art to know about the time frame in which these are made, because of that shifting under your feet, literally and figuratively, and actually in terms of making an object that represents that perception, because this is all perceptual. And are you able to receive the clues? Because he's giving you clues all the time. The more you know about this work, you can start to identify the clues. And these as beautiful, beautiful paintings that show a certain kind of virtuosity to them, and that draws us in, then you do need to read the clues, find the clues, try to understand why would that kind of disjunctive light be happening in the same painting. What's going on here? What does that imply about the place that's being described?
Well, as you, I think as you hinted, it's the fact that it's not just the ground that's shifting, but time.
Mm-hmm.
Time and our memories.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that
Which are completely unreliable and completely.
I mean, the fact that you've been paying this, or at least observing it as an artist since you were 8, and then we can start to see, the progression through how you're perceiving this place. Clearly, you are enchanted by the visuals, but also you are aware of the dissonance as well.
Yes. I think, I always have to make this distinction between, what is your primary experience of something. And of course, for me, it's visual. So I was thinking about it as we were talking, that there was one time, I think I was 14, I was here with my mother. And in those days, I seem to recall you could actually take a gondola somewhere. Just like, I want to go to this restaurant, take me. Maybe you still can. But she hired a gondola for an afternoon for me to draw and say to the gondolier, could you go over there? Just in a sketchbook, which now is lost, I don't have it anymore. But I was thinking that I don't know, was I 13, was I 12, was I 14, was I 15? I can't access. But I know the spots where I had the gondolier stop. And I know what the light, I know what the weather was like, I know all of that because my first, it's all visual, the other stuff. I always feel, even when I'm talking, as you might have guessed, that it's a constant translation into language, which is a second language for me, language. And the visual is my primary language. And I've become fairly adept, I wrote this. But it's So I think probably a fair number of people in this room have the visual as their first language too. So.
Yes, you speak the language of dreams.
Yes.
The way to proceed by our imagination and also dreams, only with images. So when we speak about images, we speak about the language that we can use for our dreams, of course, and our fantasies. It's an iconographic way to think about the world. Yeah, before words.
I was thinking about a thing you were saying about the labyrinth, as Venice as a labyrinth, where you can get lost, but you can also find yourself.
Yeah.
And I was, I'm here since 2019, I've been walking a lot and getting lost on purpose in the city. Not to find myself, but to find the city. But I eventually find myself because in Venice, everything is mirror. You see reflecting surfaces everywhere. Windows wheel, doors, the water itself, everything is reflecting here. It's like the city giving you some space to find yourself. And I think it's a feature also of Martin's painting, because they are not just like surface that you can only see. They, some way, let you in. There is a space for you to get into the painting and get lost there. And eventually you can find yourself, which is Venice sense somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I found them very interesting, apart from their aesthetically beautiful, I love them. But I found something very specific in the Urbano sense he manages to depict, which is not given for granted. And it's what Anna was saying, he really captured the essence of the city, which is floating, which is not fixed. Venice is the most lively city I've ever seen. I've seen Milan, I've seen Rome, they are trafficked, there's traffic, there is always movement. But here is a total different kind of movement because there's water. There's so much water here that gives everything this life I can find anywhere else than here. And Martin has done a very good job. And I think only an outsider that has this word could do it. Because you observe it with a different, also different language, so a different schemata in your mind. You've got it differently. But you can also have the ability to translate it into a language that you also understand.
Yeah, I would say that perhaps my process becomes a little more intense here than it normally is, because at home it's the same pressure of the trees are blooming, I have to get them before they're gone, but that's like, I have a week. Whereas here it's always, yes.
2 days, 2 more days.
Yes, it has to be faster, it has to be,
Which is also strange because, at least in my opinion, Venice is very slow. It really calms me down. I can really enjoy going around without all the masses of tourists, of course, but it's another question. And it's different. But I can understand that painting is different.
well, yeah, and
Venice.
also that this particular, it's basically, in a sense, traditional plein air painting, but it's, the thing I love about it, plein air, is that pressure, is the, it's
Like
just,
a Polaroid, you have to hurry up and get that moment.
Yes, and
otherwise, like on the Vaporetto, if you lose your
yeah,
landscape, it's gone.
the
We will
adrenaline,
never have it again.
it's an adrenaline rush.
That's a rush.
Yes. The sky's changing, I have to get it,
So it's another different rush.
Yeah.
It's a completely different rush. So they are making difference between when you work in the countryside of New York or in the city
Yes.
and in Venice. So we have like different thermometers.
Yes, yes. I always feel here too very much, it's a quote that I love and I've used before, it's the Heraclitus, that no person can bathe in the same river twice because the river is not the same. But then he amended it to say, and the person is not the same. And yes, in other words, what you were saying with how we know that, the stones on the fundamenta are always the same, but the canal is completely different water all the time.
talking about the past influencing the future, I was wondering also how much do you feel influenced by the Impressionists? Because to me, your work is a departure from the Impressionists, but I feel a little bit of, is it the time period you like? Is it
Yes, I love Impressionism. I would have to say maybe other artists more. I have, I love abstract, I think I always feel that, I guess I should say that I myself and Trace, my wife, spent a lot of time not just being artists, but also running a nonprofit space and helping other artists present their work. And I think for me, I feel like other artists complete me, that there's always, nobody expresses everything. My sense of humor doesn't really show up in these. I mean, yes, one boat floating over another might be a witty sort of moment, and I feel, well, she did that for me. I can do what I do because, other people are dealing with everything else. It's sort of liberating. And I would say yes, the Impressionists, I have a great love of Monet since I was a child.
I mean, I was thinking Turner about that, but
Yeah. And of course, all the artists who came to Venice, Whistler, Sargent. Yeah.
I also wanted to point out this other aspect of things that may not be so obvious to us as hearing. These are very sonic. They're very evocative of sound. So if you are a person who communicates otherwise and you were trying to read these marks, I think they could be very translatable in terms of reinterpreting noise and sound. Recently I've been working with a linguist who works with deaf people. Also students who have been thinking about language and its relationship to the visual and how those translations can be made, actually working with a text and seeing how that text is evocative of form. And so I think that your work is part of that. I could have easily used these in discussions about works that are visual, primarily, that's how they're communicating, but the way that they also translate and jump over that fence and become very sonic in the way that they communicate to another way of experiencing life, through being deaf. And so I think that that's another part of these that I find very, very empowering as images.
I mean, I should probably, I'm going to say that I'm also very influenced by music. I play the piano, and artists often ask me, how do you do this? How are you keeping what's on what level on layer? How do you keep it all? And it's very much like music, where there's a left hand and a right hand, and if you're playing a Bach fugue, the left hand is brought out and the right hand is brought out, and if you put all the notes together, suddenly there's a third voice and a fourth voice, and I always think of that when I'm doing this, and it informs the work a lot.
Do you usually listen to music while painting?
I put it on, but then when I start working, I don't hear it anymore. But I play before and after, and when the paint's drying, I play. I'm not very good. And in some ways, I think that's actually, I really have to read. Like this, and in some ways, I think that makes it, I think if I was more fluent, it would be less helpful for this.
So Martin is like now his work is like a bridge between Venice and other. So there is a poem from a Venetian poet is Venice, Europe. With Venice without a bridge, Europe will be an island. We can say without the bridge, the world would be an island. So now we are living in an island, and also we are starting to build and to make several bridges now with other places. And this is also the goal that we will do in our place here in Venice. When I started the first place in 1995, after coming here at one, I immediately started thinking about to have a place for creativity, what I love to call creativity, because I think that to do something for art, we also have to use our power or a muscle in a way to promote what we are in our mind, in our desire. And this was the beginning. Now, what we hope now is that Martin and also other artists coming on in other place to give much more room to these possibilities. So this is why I'm also very, very happy to start speaking here. And if you have something more to say, you have to stop or whatever you want. What do you think? You can continue or can Martin to say?
Yeah, we could probably pass him a second. Just
I think that
informally.
we spoke a lot about water. So now we need wine.
Now you're here.
I just wanted to tell you one last thing. At the beginning, you said that all of us are from outside of Venice.
Yeah.
One of my best friends here is a sixth generation Venetian, so he's a real one. And when I met him years and years ago, I used to talk about Venice, and I used to say, your city, your city. And at one point he stopped me and said, this is not a city, this is a dream. So I think your painting represents that very well.
So, thank you very much. Thank you, Martin, of course, and thank you to everybody for coming here. Thank you.
Thank you. You will be all rewarded for this.
And thanks to Jen in New York.
Oh, Jen, we forgot you. The hologram of Jen, please. The hologram of Jen is the metaverso. This one is
Yeah, it's in the metaverso.
So reality doesn't exist.
No, absolutely no. It's all virtual.
And we didn't drink it, no? So now you can imagine after.
Okay then. Thank you, Jen. Bye. Thank everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.